Hey guys, tonight we begin with a question that should fascinate anyone who's ever wondered what it would be like to witness history's final moments. Imagine waking up in a thriving Roman city, hearing the sounds of commerce beginning, smelling fresh bread from the bakeries, completely unaware that in mere hours, every building, every street, every life, would be buried beneath 20 feet of volcanic debris. We're going to reconstruct that day, hour by hour, moment by moment, using everything archaeology has taught us about Pompeii's last sunrise. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture this. You're living in one of the most prosperous cities in the Roman Empire. The year is 79 AD. Pompeii sits on the Bay of Naples, gleaming white in the Mediterranean sun, its streets paved with volcanic stone, its buildings painted in brilliant reds and yellows. The city's home to somewhere between 10 and 20,000 souls. Historians debate the exact number, all going about their daily business. Merchants, slaves, freedmen, wealthy patricians in their fine villas, families crowded into apartment blocks. It's August, hot as blazes, the kind of heat that makes you grateful for the thick walls and small windows of Roman architecture. The city's been here for centuries. Greek colonists founded it way back, then the Samnites took it over, and finally Rome absorbed it during the Social War. Those who remember their history lessons might recall that, Rome fighting its Italian allies around 90 BC. Pompeii backed the wrong side, got besieged by Sulla, and became Roman whether it liked it or not. By 79 AD, though, that's ancient history. Pompeii is thoroughly Roman now, a vacation spot for wealthy Romans who build their seaside villas here, a commercial hub trading wine and fish sauce, a place where retired soldiers settle down with their land grants. The thing about Pompeii that makes it so remarkable, so haunting, isn't just that it was destroyed. Cities get destroyed all the time. Rome itself would be sacked multiple times in the centuries to come. What makes Pompeii unique is how it was destroyed, suddenly, catastrophically, and then perfectly preserved. It's like someone hit pause on an entire civilization, buried it, and then left it for us to find 1,700 years later. Mount Vesuvius loomed over everything, of course. You couldn't ignore it. But in 79 AD, nobody in Pompeii thought of it as a volcano. The very word volcano didn't exist yet in Latin. They'd have to coin it later, after Vesuvius showed them what volcanic fury looked like. To the people of Pompeii, Vesuvius was just a mountain. A fertile mountain at that, its slopes covered in vineyards producing some of the region's best wine. Spartacus had hidden up there during his revolt, using the mountain's wooded heights as a refuge. That was 150 years ago now, just a story parents told children. There had been an earthquake 17 years earlier in 62 AD. A big one. Damaged a lot of buildings, killed some livestock, generally made a mess of things. The city was still repairing some of the damage, actually. If you walked through Pompeii in the summer of 79, you'd see construction projects everywhere, temples being rebuilt, houses getting fresh paint, the Forum still under reconstruction. The earthquake had been terrifying, sure, but earthquakes happened. This was Italy. The ground shook sometimes. You fixed what broke and moved on. Let's talk about what a normal August morning looked like in Pompeii before we get to the day that wasn't normal at all. The city would wake up early. Had to, no air conditioning, remember, and the Mediterranean summer was brutal. Smart people got their work done before the real heat set in. Bakeries would be up first, around 4 in the morning, firing up their ovens. Those ovens were massive stone affairs, wood-fired, capable of producing hundreds of loaves a day. The smell of baking bread would drift through the streets as the city stirred. The bakers weren't just making plain bread either. Pompeii had at least 30 bakeries. We found their ovens, their mills, even some carbonized loaves that got preserved in the ash. Some loaves were stamped with the baker's name, ancient advertising. You could buy regular wheat bread if you had money, or cheaper barley bread if you didn't. Some bakeries made fancy stuff, bread with cheese baked in, sweet breads with honey and nuts. For those who grew up when bread came already sliced in wax paper, imagine a time when you could smell which bakery you wanted to buy from 3 streets away. Water sellers would be filling their amphoras at the public fountains. Pompeii had running water, lead pipes bringing it in from the Serino aqueduct, feeding public fountains on every street corner, and even private homes if you could afford the connection fee. The sound of splashing water was constant, echoing off the stone walls. Kids would be sent out with clay jugs to fetch the day's water. Old men would gather at the fountains to gossip and complain about politics, same as they'd been doing for centuries, same as they do today. Shops would start opening around sunrise. Pompeii was a commercial city thriving on trade. The streets were lined with shops, tabernae they called them. Everything you could imagine: wine shops, cloth merchants, metalworkers, furniture makers, fish sauce producers. That stuff was huge business, like ketchup for Romans. Bakeries we've already mentioned, vegetable stalls, butchers, olive oil dealers. Many shops had a counter facing the street with large clay jars set into it, dolia, massive vessels for storing wine or oil or grain. The shopkeeper could sell directly to passers-by without them even entering the building. The street scene would be chaos in the best way. Carts rumbling over stone pavement. Those ruts we can still see today were worn down by decades of iron-shod wheels. Vendors shouting their wares. Dogs barking. Someone practicing scales on a lyre in an upstairs window. The slap of sandals on stone. Children playing some game involving dice and chalk marks on the pavement. Slaves hurrying on errands for their masters. The whole symphony of urban life that anyone who lived in a city before cars would recognize instantly. The wealthy would still be asleep in their villas, of course. Roman aristocrats weren't early risers unless they had to be. But their slaves were up, getting the household ready, sweeping courtyards, preparing breakfast, fetching water, tending gardens. A prosperous Pompeii home might have 20 or 30 slaves. The really wealthy families had hundreds working their country estates. Those slaves did everything: cooking, cleaning, accounting, tutoring children, skilled craft work, agricultural labor, entertainment. Rome ran on slavery, and there's no point softening that fact. We can acknowledge the humanity of every person in Pompeii while still recognizing the brutal inequality built into their social system. These houses were something special. The rich Romans of Pompeii built homes that would make modern architects weep with envy. The typical wealthy house, a domus, was organized around an open-roofed courtyard called an atrium. Rain would fall through the opening in the roof and collect in a shallow pool below, the impluvium. Very civilized, very cooling in the summer heat. The walls would be plastered and painted with elaborate frescoes, scenes from mythology mostly, executed in colors we now call Pompeian red and Pompeian yellow, though those weren't the original names obviously. Beyond the atrium you'd find a colonnaded garden, the peristyle, with columns surrounding an open area planted with flowers, herbs, fountains, statuary. Some of these gardens were small. Some were extensive enough that you could almost forget you were in the middle of a city. The wealthiest families had multiple dining rooms for different seasons, bath complexes within their own homes, private libraries, workshops where slave artisans created luxury goods. Living well was an art form for the Roman elite, and Pompeii was their playground. But here's the thing about Pompeii that makes it so valuable to historians. It wasn't just the rich folks. Most of the population weren't aristocrats living in fancy painted houses. Most were regular working people, freedmen, shopkeepers, craftsmen, laborers, the enslaved. And the volcanic ash preserved their homes too. We can walk into the tiny apartment where a fulcrum worker lived. That's a laundry worker, specializing in cleaning and treating cloth. We can see the bars where working men stopped for wine after a day's labor. We can read the graffiti they scrawled on walls, election endorsements, declarations of love, rude jokes, advertisements for gladiator shows, someone complaining about a bad hangover. It's all there, frozen in time. The graffiti is particularly revealing. Pompeii's walls are covered with it, thousands of inscriptions scratched or painted on plaster. Gaius Plumidius Dipylus was here, on a column in the Forum. Celadus the Thracian makes all the girls sigh outside the gladiatorial barracks. I don't want to sell my husband, not for all the gold in the world from a devoted wife. And less poetic ones too. Secundus defecated here, and other observations of that caliber. It's like reading ancient Roman Twitter, if Twitter had to be scratched into walls with a nail. On the morning of August 24, 79 AD, all of this was just normal life. The city was going about its business. Nobody was thinking about the mountain. Nobody was worried. There had been some small earthquakes recently, nothing unusual. The ground shook sometimes. That's just how it was. A couple of wells had dried up, which was odd. Some people noticed that the birds seemed restless. Dogs were barking more than usual. But if you've ever tried to predict disaster based on dog behavior, well, good luck with that. Dogs bark at everything. What nobody in Pompeii knew, what nobody could have known in 79 AD, was that they were living next to a volcano. Not just any volcano, but one that had been building pressure for centuries. The last time Vesuvius had erupted was so long ago that it had passed out of living memory, out of historical record, out of any kind of collective awareness. The mountain was just a mountain. The fact that it was fertile, wine-producing, prosperous mountain only made it more attractive. Nobody looked at Vesuvius and thought danger. They looked at it and thought real estate opportunity. Modern volcanologists can explain exactly what was happening beneath their feet. Vesuvius sits above a subduction zone where the African tectonic plate is sliding under the Eurasian plate. This creates magma chambers deep underground, superheated rock under tremendous pressure seeking a way to the surface. The eruption that came wouldn't be a gentle lava flow. That's Hawaiian volcano behavior. This was going to be what scientists now call a Plinian eruption, named after Pliny the Younger who witnessed and described it. Plinian eruptions are the worst kind, explosive, catastrophic, driven by gas expansion that can send material miles into the stratosphere. But again, nobody in Pompeii had this framework. No plate tectonics, no volcanic theory, no geological understanding of what Vesuvius actually was. The closest thing to an explanation would have been religious. The gods were angry, or the titans were stirring, or some other mythological interpretation. Science, as we understand it, didn't exist yet. Natural philosophy, sure. Careful observation of the natural world, absolutely. But the systematic, experimental approach to understanding physical phenomena was still centuries away. They were smart people working with incomplete information, and that's worth remembering. Around mid-morning, the forum would be filling up. This was the heart of Pompeii, the center of civic life. The forum was a large rectangular space surrounded by temples, civic buildings, and colonnaded walkways. The Temple of Jupiter anchored the north end, imposing with its columns and raised platform. The Temple of Apollo stood to one side. The Basilica, a covered hall for legal proceedings and business dealings, dominated another edge. This is where citizens came to conduct business, argue legal cases, see and be seen, catch up on news and gossip. If you were a Roman man with any social standing, you'd spend your morning at the forum, making deals, lending money, calling in favors, engaging in the complex dance of Roman patronage and clientage. The whole social system ran on personal relationships, obligations, and face-to-face interaction. You couldn't send an email. You couldn't make a phone call. If you wanted something done, you went to the forum and talked to people. And as those who came of age before the internet will understand, that actually worked remarkably well. It was slower, sure, but it built relationships that email never will. Business was conducted in writing, to be clear. Romans were thorough record keepers. They used wax tablets for everyday notes and accounts, styluses scratching letters into the wax surface. For permanent records, they used papyrus or parchment, ink made from soot and gum Arabic, reed pens. The literacy rate was higher than you might think, especially in a commercial city like Pompeii. Not universal by any means, but a significant portion of the population could read and write at least basic Latin. Had to, really, if you wanted to participate in commercial life. Around noon, the heat would be oppressive. August in southern Italy isn't kind. Those who could afford it would retreat to their homes for the afternoon. Time for lunch, Romans called it prandium, usually a light meal of bread, cheese, olives, maybe some cold meat. Then a nap during the worst heat. The streets would quiet down. Shops might close for a few hours. Even in a bustling commercial center, there's no fighting Mediterranean midday sun. Smart people got out of it. But some people couldn't take the afternoon off. Laborers, slaves, shopkeepers who couldn't afford to close, people with work that needed doing regardless of weather. They'd suffer through, finding shade where they could, drinking water from the public fountains, wiping sweat and cursing the heat. For those who remember manual labor before air-conditioned break rooms, you know exactly what this was like. The heat doesn't care about your schedule or your comfort. The work has to get done, so you do it, and you don't complain too much because everyone else is suffering the same. Late afternoon was when the city would come alive again. The heat would break slightly, and people would emerge. This was when Romans typically visited the baths. Pompeii had multiple bath complexes, both public and private. The public baths were social centers, places where you'd go not just to get clean, but to meet friends, conduct business in a relaxed setting, exercise, get a massage, maybe stop at the attached tavern afterward. The sequence was traditional. Undress in the apoditerium, exercise in the palestra, work up a sweat in the hot room, the caldarium, then a tepid room, then a cold plunge in the frigidarium. Luxury, Roman style. The engineering behind these baths was impressive. The Romans invented the hypocaust system, essentially central heating. They'd build the floor on short pillars, creating a space underneath where hot air from a furnace could circulate, warming the floor above. The walls had hollow spaces too, so hot air would rise through them, heating the entire room. The water was heated in bronze boilers, some large enough that the slaves who tended them could climb inside to clean them. The same military engineering that built roads and aqueducts went into making sure Romans could take hot baths. Priorities. Evening would bring dinner, cena, the main meal of the day. For the wealthy, this was an event. Reclining on couches arranged around three sides of a table, eating course after course of elaborate dishes, drinking wine mixed with water, conversing about politics and philosophy and gossip. The menu might include exotic items, dormice fattened on nuts, fish sauce made from fermented anchovies, roasted peacock, oysters brought in from the coast, fruits preserved in honey. The host was expected to impress and entertain. A successful dinner party demonstrated wealth, culture, and social standing. Working people ate simpler fare, obviously. Bread, olives, cheese, maybe some vegetables or beans, a bit of fish or preserved meat if they could afford it. Wine, always wine, though workers drank it heavily watered. Getting drunk on cheap wine was for festivals and special occasions, not daily life. Many people didn't even cook at home. Those apartment blocks didn't have kitchens. Too dangerous. Fire risk in a city built largely of wood and thatch despite the stone facades. So you bought prepared food from Thermopolia, ancient fast food counters with large jars set into the counter holding hot food, wine, and other ready-to-eat items. Quick, cheap, convenient. Some things never change. As darkness fell, the city would quiet. No street lighting, obviously. Once the sun set, moving around was difficult and potentially dangerous. Oil lamps provided light inside homes, but they were expensive to keep burning all night. Olive oil wasn't cheap. Most people went to bed soon after sunset. Work started at dawn, remember. You needed your sleep. The streets would empty except for the occasional night watchman, drunks leaving taverns, or people up to no good. Darkness belonged to cats, dogs, and those with good reason to avoid daylight scrutiny. This was normal life in Pompeii. Day after day, year after year. People were born, grew up, fell in love, married, had children, worked, argued, laughed, cried, grew old, died, got buried in the necropolis outside the city walls. Generation after generation, the same cycles of human existence played out against the backdrop of Mount Vesuvius, which stood there silent and green and giving, producing wine and prosperity. Now let's talk about what nobody in Pompeii understood was happening beneath their feet. Deep underground, miles below Vesuvius, magma had been accumulating in a chamber for centuries. Picture a massive cavity filled with molten rock at temperatures above 1,000 degrees Celsius. Mixed into that magma were dissolved gases, primarily water vapor, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide. As pressure built, the magma was pushed upward through weaknesses in the rock. As it rose, the pressure decreased, and those dissolved gases started coming out of solution. Like opening a shaken bottle of carbonated soda, but on a geological scale. The magma underneath Vesuvius was particularly viscous, thick and resistant to flow. That's important. Hawaiian volcanoes, by comparison, have thin, runny lava that flows relatively gently. You can often walk away from a Hawaiian eruption. The thick, gas-rich magma under Vesuvius was a completely different beast. When it finally broke through, it wouldn't flow. It would explode. In the weeks before August 24, there were warning signs, subtle ones. Springs and wells drying up as underground water was heated by rising magma. Small earthquakes, frequent enough that Pompeians commented on them but not severe enough to cause serious alarm. Remember, they'd had that big earthquake 17 years earlier. Compared to 62 AD, these little tremors were nothing. A few dishes rattled. A loose roof tile fell. Life continued. Modern analysis of the deposits suggests that Vesuvius might have had some very minor activity in the days immediately before the main eruption. Small ash emissions, perhaps steam explosions as groundwater hit hot magma, but nothing that would have screamed, "Evacuate now." Nothing that would have overcome the normal human tendency to assume that today will be like yesterday. People don't abandon their homes and businesses because the ground shook a little. They shrug, clean up the broken pottery, and get on with their lives. August 24 dawned like any other summer day. Hot, clear, bright. The city woke up the same way it had for decades. Bakeries fired their ovens. Water sellers made their rounds. Merchants opened their shops. Kids played in the streets. The forum filled with citizens conducting business. Nobody looked at Vesuvius and saw anything unusual. It was just Wednesday, just another day, except it wasn't. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The hour is debated, but that's the best estimate from historical accounts and modern analysis. Mount Vesuvius exploded. The initial explosion was spectacular and terrifying. The mountain's summit shattered, and a column of ash, pumice, and gas blasted upward with tremendous force. Pliny the Younger, watching from across the Bay of Naples at Misenum, described it as looking like an enormous pine tree with a tall trunk and spreading branches at the top. Modern volcanologists call it an eruption column. The column would eventually reach over 20 miles high, punching into the stratosphere. The sound must have been beyond comprehension. Imagine every thunderstorm you've ever experienced, every sonic boom, every explosion, and multiply it by 1,000. The blast was audible in Misenum, over 20 miles away. In Pompeii, directly beneath the column, the noise would have been physically painful. A continuous roar, punctuated by louder detonations as gas pockets exploded, as lightning crackled through the ash cloud. Yes, volcanic lightning, a real phenomenon caused by static discharge in the ash particles. The initial reaction in Pompeii would have been confusion. What was that sound? Why did the ground shake so violently? What was that enormous thing growing above Vesuvius? Remember, nobody in 79 AD had a framework for understanding volcanic eruptions. No one was thinking the mountain is erupting. They were thinking, what in the name of Jupiter is happening? Within minutes, pumice began falling on Pompeii. Pumice is volcanic rock filled with gas bubbles, making it light enough to float on water. The pieces falling on Pompeii ranged from pebble-sized to fist-sized, mostly white to light gray in color. At first it would have seemed almost manageable, annoying, strange, but not immediately lethal. People could dodge the falling stones. They could take shelter. Some probably went outside to collect samples, marveling at the odd rocks falling from the sky. But pumice kept falling, and falling, and falling. The initial rate was probably several centimeters per hour, accumulating quickly. The flat roofs of many Pompeian buildings began to sag under the weight. Imagine inches of heavy, wet snow piling up, except it's rock. Volcanic rock, filling streets, blocking doorways, making movement difficult. The sky darkened as ash blocked the sun. Within hours, day had turned to an eerie twilight. This is when the first critical decisions had to be made. Do you stay or do you go? Some people decided to flee immediately. Smart choice, as it turned out. They grabbed what they could carry, jewelry, money, a few possessions, and headed for the city gates. The roads out of Pompeii led toward the coast, toward Naples, toward any direction away from that terrifying column rising behind them. Those who left early, when the streets were still mostly clear, when the pumice accumulation was only a few inches deep, they had a chance. Many of them made it. We know this because we don't find their bodies in the ruins. Others chose to wait it out, shelter in place. This was their home, their business, their entire world. Leaving meant abandoning everything. Where would they go? How would they survive? And surely this would pass. Surely the mountain would stop throwing rocks at them soon. Better to wait inside, protect your property from looters, hope for the storm to end. You can't entirely fault their logic. They had no precedent for this. No one alive had seen a Plinian eruption. If you've lived your whole life experiencing occasional earthquakes and bad storms, your instinct is to weather this one too. Wait it out. Emerge when it's over and deal with the cleanup. That's what sensible people did. Except this wasn't a storm. This was a volcanic eruption of extraordinary violence, and it wasn't going to stop. By evening, Pompeii was buried under more than a foot of pumice. Roofs were collapsing. The weight was too much. Imagine the terror of being inside when your roof caves in. The sudden crash, the cloud of dust and ash, the falling timbers and tiles, the pumice pouring through the opening. Some people died this way, crushed under collapsing buildings. We found their remains in the archaeological record, buried in place where they took shelter. The pumice fall continued for roughly 12 hours through the night. Imagine the psychological horror. Complete darkness, the ash cloud blocked even starlight, the constant roar of the eruption, the ground shaking with continuous tremors, pumice clattering on the few remaining roofs, piling up in streets, making movement nearly impossible, lightning flashing in the volcanic cloud above, briefly illuminating the nightmare, the smell of sulfur, the difficulty breathing as fine ash particles filled the air. People who decided to wait it out were now trapped. The pumice accumulation was several feet deep. Doorways were blocked. Moving through streets meant wading through loose volcanic rock, exhausting work made worse by the darkness and falling debris. Some people tried to make a run for it during the night. We found bodies on the streets, buried in pumice, their final positions suggesting they were trying to escape when they fell or collapsed or got buried. By midnight, the eruption had deposited over 6 feet of pumice on Pompeii. The city was being buried alive. But the worst was yet to come. Around midnight, the eruption changed character. The eruption column, which had been holding steady at an enormous height, began to collapse. When an eruption column collapses, it creates what volcanologists call pyroclastic flows. These are the deadliest volcanic phenomena known. A pyroclastic flow is a ground-hugging avalanche of superheated gas, ash, and rock fragments that races down the volcano's slopes at hundreds of miles per hour. The temperature inside a pyroclastic flow can exceed 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Nothing survives. Nothing. The first pyroclastic flow from Vesuvius roared down toward the towns of Herculaneum and Oplontes, which lay on the other side of the mountain from Pompeii. Those towns were destroyed instantly. Everyone who'd remained was killed in seconds. The flows buried Herculaneum under 60 feet of material, so deep that excavation is still difficult today. Pompeii, being on the downwind side and slightly farther from the volcano, was spared the initial flows, but not for long. Around 6:30 in the morning of August 25, we can estimate the time from the stratigraphic layers and historical accounts. A massive pyroclastic flow surged over Pompeii's walls. The people still alive in Pompeii had no warning, no chance. The flow moved faster than anyone could run, especially through streets choked with pumice. The superheated gas killed instantly, heat shock, lungs seared by inhaling gas at several hundred degrees. Bodies didn't burn in the traditional sense because there wasn't enough oxygen in the flow for combustion. Instead, people died in place, their final postures preserved. The flow lasted only moments. A surge of heat and death, then it passed, leaving Pompeii buried under an additional layer of ash and pumice several feet thick. Those who'd survived the pumice fall through 12 hours of terror died in seconds when the flow hit. Several more pyroclastic flows followed over the next few hours, each one adding more material, sealing the city deeper in volcanic debris. By the time the eruption finally subsided, Pompeii was buried under more than 20 feet of ash and pumice. The city had ceased to exist. Mount Vesuvius continued rumbling for days, but the main eruption was over. Where Pompeii had stood, there was now a barren landscape of ash. Survivors from neighboring areas who'd fled to safety eventually returned to look for loved ones, to salvage what they could. They dug into the ash, trying to find their homes. Some succeeded, creating tunnels that we can still identify in the archaeological record. They recovered valuables, statuary, anything that could be carried away. But mostly they found death and destruction. The Roman government sent aid. The Emperor Titus, who'd only been in power for 2 months when Vesuvius erupted, organized relief efforts. Refugees were resettled. Some areas near Pompeii were cleared and rebuilt, but Pompeii itself, no. The city was too thoroughly buried, too destroyed, too expensive to excavate with Roman technology. They wrote it off. Eventually, people forgot exactly where it had stood. The land above was repurposed for agriculture. Pompeii passed out of memory. For 1,600 years, the city lay beneath the ash. Houses, temples, shops, streets, art, graffiti, furniture, bodies, all perfectly preserved in the airless ash layers. The volcanic material sealed everything away from oxygen, water, and decay. It was like putting the entire city in a time capsule. The rediscovery happened gradually. In 1599, workers digging a canal uncovered some ancient walls and inscriptions. Nobody realized what they'd found. Over the next century, more discoveries were made during various construction projects. Artifacts were recovered and sold. Still, nobody understood the full significance. The systematic excavation of Pompeii began in 1748 under the sponsorship of Charles III of Spain, who was then King of Naples. It was slow work, hand tools, limited understanding of archaeology, treasure hunting more than scientific investigation. But gradually, the scale of what lay beneath the ash became clear. This wasn't just some ruins. This was an entire city, preserved almost exactly as it had been at the moment of destruction. The excavations continued through the 18th and 19th centuries, becoming more scientific over time. Archaeologists developed better methods. They learned to preserve what they found. They began to understand what they were looking at, not just buildings and objects, but a complete snapshot of Roman life frozen in time. One of the most important discoveries came in 1863, when archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli developed a technique for creating plaster casts of the victims. Here's how it worked. When the bodies decayed over centuries, they left voids in the hardened ash, perfect molds in negative. Fiorelli realized that by carefully pouring plaster into these voids, he could create casts showing the victims' exact positions and postures at the moment of death. The results were haunting and profound. The casts reveal people in their final moments. A family huddled together, a man crouched trying to protect his face from the heat, a dog straining at his chain, a pregnant woman curled on her side, a group of gladiators caught in their barracks, 2 children clinging to each other. These aren't just statistics about casualties. These are individual human beings, captured forever in their moment of greatest terror. Those who served in combat will understand something about how these people died. There's a certain posture that victims of heat and gas take. Military men who have seen battlefield casualties know it. The body contracts, arms draw up, legs curl. It's called the pugilistic pose because the person looks like a boxer with their guard up. It happens when muscles contract from extreme heat. Seeing that pose in plaster, knowing these were ordinary citizens caught in circumstances they couldn't possibly have prepared for, it hits differently than looking at ancient artifacts. The excavations revealed extraordinary details about daily life. Complete houses with their decoration intact, bakeries with carbonized bread still in the ovens, wine shops with amphorae still on their racks, a surgeon's house with his complete set of medical instruments, a brothel with painted advertisements, political campaign posters on walls, graffiti ranging from profound to profane, bar counters with the day's menu painted on the wall, gardens preserved down to the root cavities, allowing archaeologists to identify what plants were grown. The amount of organic material preserved is remarkable. Wooden furniture, though carbonized, retained its shape. Fabric, preserved in ash, showed weaving patterns and design. Food remains, eggs, nuts, bread, even a cake found on a counter. The shapes of bodies, doors, shutters, wooden beams, all preserved as voids that could be cast. It's an archaeologist's dream and a historian's treasure trove. What makes Pompeii so valuable isn't just that it's old. There are plenty of ancient sites. What makes it unique is the completeness, the snapshot quality. Most ancient sites show us what survived: stone buildings, major temples, public works. Pompeii shows us everything. The grand and the ordinary, the wealthy villa and the tiny shop, the official and the personal, the public face and the private reality. We can walk through a Pompeian house and see exactly how the rooms connected, where they cooked, where they entertained, where they slept. We can read their graffiti and understand their humor, their politics, their loves and hates. We can see children's toys, women's jewelry, men's work tools, slaves' quarters. We can identify garum production facilities, that fish sauce the Romans loved, and see exactly how it was made. We can visit the gladiator barracks and see where these men lived between fights. We can stand in the amphitheater where 20,000 Pompeians cheered for blood sports. Here's something worth considering. Roughly 2,000 bodies have been found in Pompeii. That's out of a population of 10 to 20,000. Where did everyone else go? They escaped. Which means that despite the chaos, the darkness, the falling pumice, the terror and confusion, most people made it out. That's worth remembering. Humans are resilient. Even in the face of catastrophe beyond their understanding, most managed to survive. The ones who died fell into several categories. Some were trapped by the pumice accumulation before the pyroclastic flows arrived, either elderly, very young, disabled, or simply trapped in buildings with collapsed roofs. Some were apparently trying to save their valuables. We found bodies clutching jewelry and coins. Some seemed to have been attempting escape but got caught by the flows. Some had taken shelter in places they thought safe, cellars, interior rooms, that became tombs when the flows arrived. The pyroclastic flows killed regardless of where you were or what protection you sought. In Herculaneum, people who'd taken shelter in boat houses on the beach died instantly when the first flow hit. Their skeletons show no signs of struggle, one moment alive, the next not. The heat was so intense that some metals found on the beach had melted. Modern forensic analysis of the skeletal remains provides extraordinary detail about how people died. The temperatures in the pyroclastic flows were hot enough to cause immediate vaporization of soft tissues and boiling of the brain. Some skulls show explosive fractures from internal pressure. It was, at least, instantaneous. Nobody suffered for long. The eruption also provides scientists with invaluable data about volcanic behavior. Vesuvius in 79 AD was what we now call a Plinian eruption, and it's the type example. By studying the deposits, measuring the layers, analyzing the mineralogy and comparing historical accounts with physical evidence, volcanologists have pieced together exactly what happened, in what sequence, and approximately when. This helps predict behavior of similar volcanoes today. Every dormant volcano that shows similar geological characteristics gets watched carefully because we know what Vesuvius can do. Mount Vesuvius is still active, by the way, still capable of doing exactly what it did in 79 AD. Naples sits in its shadow, a metropolitan area of more than 3 million people. The volcano last erupted in 1944, not a major eruption, but a reminder that it's still awake. Modern monitoring is extensive. If Vesuvius shows signs of a major eruption, authorities have evacuation plans. Whether 3 million people can actually evacuate quickly enough is another question, but at least now we know what we're looking at. We have the advantage of Pompeii's example. Visiting Pompeii today is a strange experience. The site is vast. You can spend days there and not see everything. Walking the ancient streets, you see cart ruts worn into the pavement by Roman wheels. You see stepping stones that let pedestrians cross streets without walking through whatever was flowing in the gutters. And yes, let's not ask too many questions about that. You see shops with their counters intact. You see houses with frescoes still bright on the walls. You see the amphitheater, the forum, the temples, the baths, and you see the casts, the bodies, the dogs still chained up in a courtyard, unable to escape, the family in the garden of the fugitives, 13 people who'd taken shelter together and died together, the man in the bathhouse crouched against a wall. Every cast is a person. Every person had a story. They woke up that morning and went about their business, and by the next day they were gone, buried, forgotten, until archaeologists found them and brought them back into the light. Here's what Pompeii teaches us, beyond the obvious historical value. First, it reminds us that catastrophe can strike without warning. These people went about their normal day, and then suddenly they were fighting for their lives. The illusion of normalcy is just that, an illusion. The ground we stand on isn't as stable as we like to think. The mountains around us aren't always as peaceful as they appear. Life can change in an instant, and there's no predicting when or how. Second, it shows us the value of preparedness and knowledge. The people of Pompeii didn't know what a volcano was. They didn't understand the warning signs. They had no framework for making good decisions about when to flee. Today, we do. We have the knowledge that cost Pompeii its existence. We can monitor volcanoes, predict eruptions, evacuate populations. Knowledge is survival. Third, it demonstrates the permanence of the human mark. Pompeii's people thought they were living ordinary, temporary lives. Just another day in the city. Just another moment that would pass and be forgotten. But the ash preserved them. Their graffiti, their jokes, their letters, their homes, their bodies, all survived. Nothing is as temporary as we think it is. Everything we do leaves traces. The marks we make outlast us in ways we can't predict. Fourth, Pompeii humanizes history in a way few sites can. Ancient Rome can seem like a collection of emperors and battles and grand public works, impersonal, distant, more myth than reality. But Pompeii shows us regular people. The baker making bread, the shopkeeper selling wine, the family eating dinner, the kid drawing on a wall when they should have been doing something else. These were people like us. They loved, they worried, they laughed, they worked, they struggled. They were us, just in different clothes and different times. And finally, Pompeii reminds us of both the power of nature and the resilience of the human project. Vesuvius killed thousands and buried multiple cities. It was catastrophic, overwhelming, unstoppable, but humans came back. They rebuilt nearby towns. They eventually excavated Pompeii itself, pulling it back from oblivion. They studied it, learned from it, preserved it, shared it with the world. Nature can destroy, but humans persist. We remember, we rebuild, we continue. Those of you who remember the Depression understand something about resilience, about facing circumstances beyond your control and finding ways to endure. Your parents who lived through it, or you yourselves who experienced it young, you knew what it meant when everything fell apart and you had to just keep going. Pompeii's people didn't have that chance. The catastrophe was too sudden, too complete. But the survivors who came after, who dealt with the aftermath, who tried to dig out their city and eventually moved on, they showed that same resilience. Life continues because humans make it continue. For those who fought in wars, who saw friends fall, who experienced chaos and terror and circumstances beyond human control, Pompeii might resonate differently. This was, in its way, a battlefield. Not one with enemies you could fight, but one where death came indiscriminately and instantly. The randomness of who survived and who didn't, the luck of having made the right decision at the right moment, the thin line between life and death. Veterans understand that. Pompeii was nature's war against humanity, and humanity lost that battle but won the larger war by surviving, remembering, and learning. The technological progress you've witnessed in your lifetimes, from before television to the internet, from propeller planes to space exploration, from manual labor to automation, that progress means we're better prepared than Pompeii was. We understand volcanoes now. We monitor them. We can predict them with increasing accuracy. The knowledge we've gained from studying Pompeii and other volcanic disasters has saved countless lives. That's Pompeii's gift to us, the knowledge purchased with their lives. It's worth spending a moment considering what Pompeii tells us about Roman engineering and urban planning. The city had running water from an aqueduct, an achievement many cities wouldn't manage again for over 1,000 years after Rome fell. It had public baths, an amphitheater that could seat 20,000 people, a sophisticated political system, commercial infrastructure that supported long-distance trade, standardized coinage, written records, published books, art, theater, music, literature. This was a civilization at its height, and it shows. The Romans built things to last. Their concrete, developed in Italy and used throughout their empire, was so good that Roman structures still standing today are more durable than many modern buildings. Their roads lasted for centuries. Their aqueducts still carry water in some places. They understood engineering principles that would be forgotten in the Middle Ages and had to be relearned during the Renaissance. The quality of Roman construction is something that would resonate with anyone who worked in trades when things were still built by hand, built right, built to last. The city planning was sophisticated too. Streets laid out in a grid, infrastructure for water and sewage, zoning that separated incompatible uses, building codes that required certain construction standards. All of this in a city 2,000 years old. It's easy to look at ancient people as somehow primitive, but Pompeii demonstrates otherwise. These were intelligent, creative, organized people who built complex systems and made them work. The social structure was brutal by modern standards, obviously. Slavery, patriarchal hierarchy, limited political participation, legal inequalities based on birth and status. We can acknowledge that while still appreciating the genuine achievements of Roman civilization. Historical understanding requires holding multiple truths simultaneously. The Romans accomplished extraordinary things, and they built those accomplishments on systems we'd consider morally unacceptable. Both facts are true. Both are part of the story. Walking through Pompeii today, you see evidence of all of this. The grand villas of the wealthy, decorated with art that wouldn't look out of place in a modern museum. The tiny workshops of craftsmen, equipped with tools that would be recognizable to artisans working today. The public spaces designed for civic engagement. The private spaces showing domestic life. The sacred spaces for religious worship. The commercial spaces for making a living. All of it preserved, all of it telling the story of a complex urban society. And you see the victims. Can't avoid them, shouldn't avoid them. They're the reason Pompeii matters beyond historical and architectural interest. These were people, real people with real lives, cut short in an afternoon by circumstances they couldn't have foreseen or prevented. Every cast is a reminder of mortality, fragility, the randomness of disaster. The children are particularly difficult to see. There's something about a small cast, a child's body preserved in its final position, that hits hard. Children shouldn't die in disasters. Shouldn't die at all, ideally, though of course they always have and always will. But seeing it made real, made physical, made permanent in plaster, it's sobering. It's a reminder that disaster doesn't discriminate. Age, wealth, status, virtue, none of it mattered when Vesuvius erupted. The mountain didn't care. Nature doesn't care. It simply is, and we exist within it on borrowed time. For those of you who have lost people suddenly, in war, in accidents, in disasters, you might understand the emotional impact of Pompeii differently than tourists do. These people didn't get to say goodbye, didn't get to make peace with their fate. One moment they were alive, concerned about the ash falling on their houses, and the next they were gone. That kind of sudden loss, that abrupt transition from being to not being, it's familiar to anyone who's experienced sudden death of loved ones. Pompeii is a city of sudden losses, all happening at once. But there's also something profound about how thoroughly they've been remembered. These people who should have been lost to history, who would have been forgotten like billions of other humans who lived and died without leaving traces, they're preserved. We know their city. We walk their streets. We see their art. We read their words. We stand in their homes. In a strange way, they achieved a kind of immortality. Not the immortality they would have chosen, obviously, but immortality nonetheless. There's a phrase carved on sundials sometimes, particularly old ones from the 18th century. Tempus fugit, time flies. The Romans knew this. They wrote about it constantly. Carpe diem, seize the day, because time is fleeting and life is short. The Stoic philosophers, popular among educated Romans, preached about accepting fate, understanding that we don't control external events, only our responses to them. Marcus Aurelius, writing his meditations while on military campaign, reminded himself constantly about mortality and impermanence. The people of Pompeii might not have been Stoic philosophers, but they understood these concepts. They lived with death more intimately than we do. Higher infant mortality, shorter life expectancy, common diseases we've now conquered, dangers we've eliminated. They knew life was fragile. They just didn't expect it to end quite so suddenly for their entire city. The excavation and preservation of Pompeii represents a kind of redemption. The city was destroyed, yes. The people died, yes. But by being preserved, by being excavated, by being studied and shared and remembered, something was saved from that catastrophe. Knowledge was gained. Understanding was deepened. Future lives were saved because we learned from Vesuvius what volcanic eruptions could do. Visiting Pompeii raises questions that don't have easy answers. How do we memorialize disaster? How do we learn from the past without exploiting it? How do we show respect for the dead while still studying what they can teach us? These are ethical questions that archaeologists and historians continue to grapple with. The plaster casts, for instance, are they appropriate? They're undeniably powerful, educational, moving. They make the victims real in a way descriptions never could. But they're also human remains, even if only indirectly. Some argue they should be reburied, returned to rest. Others argue they're too valuable as teaching tools and memorials to hide away. There's no obvious right answer. Different cultures, different ethical frameworks, different priorities lead to different conclusions. What's clear is that Pompeii matters. It matters historically, giving us unprecedented insight into daily Roman life. It matters scientifically, teaching us about volcanic behavior and disaster dynamics. It matters culturally, as one of the most visited archaeological sites in the world. It matters emotionally, confronting us with mortality and impermanence. It matters educationally, showing multiple generations what ancient civilization looked like from the inside. For those of you who have lived long enough to see cities change completely, neighborhoods demolished and rebuilt, industries rise and fall, communities scatter and reform, Pompeii offers a strange kind of permanence. This city, frozen in time, doesn't change. The streets stay the same. The buildings remain. The past is preserved. In a world of constant change, there's something almost comforting about a place where time stopped, where history became permanent. But it's also a reminder of impermanence. This city that seemed permanent to its inhabitants, this civilization that thought it would last forever, it all ended in a day. Rome itself would fall within a few centuries. The aqueducts would crumble. The roads would be forgotten. The literature would be lost and had to be laboriously recovered during the Renaissance. Nothing lasts forever, not even the seemingly eternal. Yet here we are, 2,000 years later, still learning from Pompeii, still walking its streets, still studying its artifacts, still trying to understand what it was like to be there, to live in that time, to die in that disaster. So maybe something does last after all. Not the physical city that was buried, not the people, they're gone, but the memory, the knowledge, the connection across time, that persists. There's a graffito in Pompeii that's always stuck with archaeologists. Simple, written in charcoal on a wall dated to October 79 AD. Impossible, of course, the city was buried in August. But it's there. Someone returned to Pompeii after the eruption, months later, and wrote the date on a wall. Maybe a former resident coming back to find their home. Maybe a looter seeking valuables. Maybe just someone marking that they'd been there, seen the devastation, witnessed the aftermath. That graffito represents something important, the human need to mark our passage, to say, I was here. All through Pompeii you see this impulse. Political slogans painted on walls, personal messages scratched into plaster, names carved on columns, shop signs advertising wares, artists signing their frescoes, everyone trying to leave their mark, to be remembered, to matter. They succeeded, though not in ways they could have imagined. The baker whose name was on his bread stamps, we remember him now. The politician whose campaign posters covered the walls, we know his name. The brothel owner who painted prices on the wall, that advertisement survived 2 millennia. The child who scratched I was here on a wall 2,000 years later, we read those words and think, yes, you were. That's what Pompeii ultimately gives us, connection. Connection to the past, yes. Connection to people we'll never know, yes. But more than that, connection to the universal human experience. These people worried about money and loved their families and complained about politics and wanted their children to have better lives. They found joy in simple pleasures and endured daily hardships and dreamed of better tomorrows. They were us. We are them. The clothes change, the technology changes, but the fundamental human experience remains constant across centuries. When you visit Pompeii, if you ever get the chance, don't rush. Don't just see the famous spots and leave. Sit for a while. Find a quiet corner away from the tour groups. Look at the wheel ruts in the stones and think about the carts that wore them down over decades of use. Read the graffiti on the walls. Imagine the shops full of goods, the streets full of people, the city alive and vibrant. Then remember what happened. Remember that all of this ended in less than a day. And then think about this. We're not so different from them. We live in the shadow of dangers we can't fully control: natural disasters, technological risks, social upheavals, unexpected catastrophes. We go about our daily lives assuming tomorrow will be like today, that our cities will endure, that our civilization is permanent. But Pompeii teaches us that assumption is always provisional, always temporary, always subject to forces beyond our control. That's not meant to be depressing. It's meant to be clarifying. If everything is temporary, if disaster can strike without warning, if our time is limited and uncertain, then what matters? What's worth doing? How should we live? The people of Pompeii, for all that they couldn't have known their time was short, left us an answer in how they lived. They built beautiful things. They created art. They wrote poetry and philosophy. They loved their families. They worked hard at their trades. They participated in civic life. They tried to make their small corner of the world better, more beautiful, more prosperous. They lived fully in their present moment because that's all anyone can ever do. Those of you who have lived through the Depression, through wars, through economic upheavals and social changes, you understand this already. You've seen that nothing is guaranteed, that security is an illusion, that the only constant is change. And yet you've persisted. You've built lives, raised families, contributed to your communities, found meaning and purpose despite uncertainty. That's the human project. That's what Pompeii's people were doing. That's what we're all still doing. The excavations continue. Even today, new areas of Pompeii are being uncovered. New discoveries are made regularly. New houses, new artifacts, new information about how Romans lived. The work is painstaking, time-consuming, and extraordinarily careful. Modern archaeology isn't like the treasure hunting of the 18th century. Now, every layer of soil is screened. Every artifact is documented in place before removal. Every discovery is analyzed using the latest scientific techniques. We're learning things about Pompeii that earlier excavators missed or destroyed in their haste. And we're learning to preserve what we've uncovered. The early excavations exposed buildings to weathering they'd been protected from for centuries under the ash. Frescoes faded. Structures deteriorated. Now, conservation is as important as excavation. Protecting what we've found, maintaining it for future generations, making sure that Pompeii can continue teaching us for centuries to come. Because that's Pompeii's ultimate gift. It keeps teaching. Each generation finds something new in the ruins, asks new questions, develops new understanding. The Victorians saw Pompeii one way, obsessed with its moral lessons about vice and virtue. The modernists saw it another way, fascinated by its quotidian details. We see it yet another way, with access to scientific techniques and analytical methods earlier generations lacked. Future generations will see it differently still. The story of Pompeii isn't over. As long as people visit, study, wonder, and learn, the city continues to exist. Not as it was, that city is gone forever, buried under ash and extinct for 2,000 years, but as a different kind of city, a city of memory, a city of the dead that teaches the living, a monument to both human vulnerability and human persistence. Every visitor to Pompeii takes something different away. Historians find data. Artists find inspiration. Students find lessons. Tourists find wonder. Everyone finds mortality, a reminder that we too are temporary, that our civilizations too are fragile, that nothing human is permanent except the marks we leave behind. For those of you in your later years, having seen so much change, having witnessed history unfold, having lived through transformations that would have seemed impossible when you were young, Pompeii might offer a particular kind of reflection. You've seen empires rise and fall in your lifetime, if not territorial empires, then economic and ideological ones. You've seen technologies appear that revolutionized everything. You've seen social changes that rewrote the rules. You understand, perhaps better than younger people can, that everything is temporary, everything changes, nothing lasts forever, but you also understand that some things do persist. Values, memories, knowledge, the things we teach the next generation, the stories we tell, the marks we leave. Pompeii persisted because people chose to remember it, excavate it, preserve it, and share it. That was a choice. We could have left it buried, but we didn't. We chose to learn from it, to honor its dead, to let it teach us. As night falls over Pompeii, as the last visitors leave and the gates close, the city returns to silence. The streets empty. The ruins settle. The stones rest. Vesuvius looms above, dark against the stars. The city sleeps, if a city of the dead can be said to sleep. And somewhere in the darkness, perhaps the spirits of those who died there rest easier, knowing they're remembered. Knowing their city lives on, not as it was, but as something new. A teacher, a memorial, a connection between past and present. Knowing that their deaths, meaningless and random as they were, at least purchased knowledge that has saved others. That's as close to redemption as tragedy ever gets. The morning will come. The sun will rise over Vesuvius just as it did on August 24, 79 AD. The gates will open. New visitors will arrive, walking the same streets, seeing the same houses, reading the same graffiti, wondering at the same mysteries. The cycle continues. The city teaches. The past speaks to the present. The dead remind the living that time is fleeting and life is precious, and we should use our days well because we never know which one will be our last. Pompeii's people didn't know they were living their last day. They got up, they went about their business, they made their plans, they expected tomorrow. Tomorrow never came, not for them, but it came for their city, paradoxically. The city that died that day has lived for 2,000 years since, teaching generations about life, death, civilization, catastrophe, memory, and meaning. That lamp still burns, metaphorically. The light of Pompeii's memory, the knowledge gained from its tragedy, the connections forged across 2 millennia. As long as we remember, as long as we learn, as long as we honor those who came before us, that lamp stays lit. And so, tonight, as you drift towards sleep, think about the baker in Pompeii, pulling bread from his oven at dawn on August 24. Think about the merchant opening his shop, expecting a normal day of commerce. Think about the child playing in the street, the woman fetching water, the old man gossiping at the fountain. Think about their normalcy, their ordinariness, their assumption that tomorrow would come. Think about how they were wrong about tomorrow, but right about something more important, that the present moment is all we ever have. That the bread being baked, the shop being opened, the water being fetched, the gossip being shared, those moments mattered. They were real. They were life. And in being preserved, they became more than moments. They became eternal. You've lived long enough to know that nothing is truly eternal, but you also know that some things persist. Love persists, memory persists, knowledge persists. The marks we make persist even when we don't. Pompeii persists, not as a living city, but as something perhaps more valuable. A mirror held up to humanity, showing us ourselves across the chasm of time. In their faces, preserved in plaster, we see our own mortality. In their streets, buried in ash, we see our own impermanence. In their city, excavated and studied, we see our own curiosity and persistence and need to understand. Let the ruins rest now. Let the voices fade into comfortable silence. Let the images settle into memory. Pompeii has told its story once more, as it has countless times before, as it will countless times to come. The past has spoken. The dead have shared their testimony. The lesson has been taught. And the lesson is this: life is brief, change is constant, disaster is possible, death is certain. But in the face of all that, we persist. We build, we create, we love, we remember, we learn. Connect. We make our marks on the walls of time, and some of those marks endure far longer than we could ever imagine. Sleep now. Let Pompeii fade into dreams. Let its streets become pathways through memory. Let its voices become the whisper of centuries settling into rest. Tomorrow, the sun will rise over Vesuvius, just as it always has, just as it always will. Tomorrow, life will continue as it did after August 24, 79 AD. As it always does, as it always will. The dead of Pompeii sleep beneath their ash blanket, preserved forever, remembered always. And we, the living, carry their story forward. That's the bargain we make with history. They teach us. We remember them. Their lives, brief as they were, echo forward across time. Our lives, brief as they will be, will echo too. Rest well. Dream of ancient streets and mountain shadows. Dream of lives lived fully in their moment. Dream of a city frozen in time, waiting patiently to teach each new generation what it means to be human, to be mortal, to be part of the long, unbroken chain of humanity reaching back to the beginning and forward to whatever end awaits. Pompeii endures. Memory endures. And in the quiet of this night, as you drift into sleep, you too become part of that endurance, part of the story, part of the connection, part of the long conversation between past and present that we call history. Good night. Sleep well, and when you wake, remember, you, like Pompeii's people, are living in your own last day before something. We all are. Make it count. Leave your mark. Live fully. The rest will take care of itself. The city of ash and memory bids you peaceful dreams.